protests. Now, Amnesty International is calling for a full investigation into those protest killings. I want to bring in Shenilla Mohamed. She's the Executive Director at Amnesty International South Africa. Shenilla, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. I mean, once again, public order policing comes under the spotlight, doesn't it? It's not the first time you've raised this. How are you reading what happened today in Thembisa?
Good evening, Devin, and good evening to your viewers. Look, I mean, I think, once again, we are really disturbed by the fact that, again, we've seen loss of life in what should be a constitutional right, which is the right to protest. And once again, we are seeing, that the police have not only indiscriminately used what they call non-lethal weapons, which include rubber bullets, which are actually not non-lethal. But also we are seeing reports coming in from IPID in particular of the potential use of live ammunition. And all of this is absolutely unacceptable. First of all, nobody should die while they're exercising their constitutional right to protest. And I think, we've raised this constantly, that one of the challenges is that the police, or many of the police officers that are deployed to cover public order policing, are not properly trained to do so. And so we see this time and time again, that every time there is a major protest action, people are dying.
You've called for an investigation into how police reacted to this protest, right? So what exactly needs to be answered here? It's now 4 dead.
Well, I think, first of all, we have to establish, what was the cause. I mean, who was responsible for the death of these 4 people. And, again, we have to, and that requires police to collect the evidence and to do the investigations and to carry out the forensics. And I think what we've been finding, Devin, is that there seems to be no accountability when it comes to these types of cases. And so what we're saying is this, again, like we've called for each time, somebody has to be held to account. The loss of life is unacceptable. So what we're calling for is a full investigation by IPID, and those that are found to be responsible, not only for the use of live ammunition, if that was the case, but also for the death of these protesters, they have to be brought to justice. Now, what we're struggling with, and one of the things that concerns us, is we are not seeing justice being served. I mean, you will recall the case of Mr. Matumba, who died coming out of a pharmacy and was caught in this crossfire during the Wits protests. And, and then those that were accused of being responsible were recently, the case was dropped against them. So, we are not seeing justice. We are seeing people dying with no accountability. And, if they cannot find those that are accountable on the ground, then the Minister of Police should be held accountable. And if he can't be held accountable, the President should, because the loss of life should not be accepted in such incidents.
Having said that about accountability, Shenilla, what should IPID, the police watchdog, do in this case? I mean, presumably you've mentioned instances in the past that were not done to the sort of efficient requirements, if you like. I mean, what should IPID do in this instance to just sort of sway away from the past?
Well, I think, first of all, a proper investigation, like I said, has to be done. But then I think the other thing is that, according to international laws and even the law of this country, the excessive, the use of force or the use of ammunition or, that type of force against protesters has to be looked through the lens of proportionality and necessity. So the questions IPID has to ask is, was it necessary for them to be firing on these crowds? Now, the police in South Africa have often used the argument that the reason that they use excessive force is because the crowds are violent. The crowds are burning property. The crowds are throwing stones. The crowds are attacking them. And again, this is one of the things as Amnesty we've been calling out to protesters as well, is that They need to exercise their constitutional right to protest, but it's to peaceful protest, Devin, not to violent protest. And what we're saying is that go out and protest peacefully, because if they resort to violence, then they give the police an excuse to use excessive force. And when they use excessive force, ultimately people will die. So on both sides, we've been calling for restraint. We've been saying, look, yes, they are absolutely within their rights to protest against service delivery failures, and we know that it's the poor that have been suffering mostly from service delivery failures, and they are tired. But at the same time, violence is not the answer. And so, on both sides, we've been calling for restraint. But on the side of the state, the accountability is higher. They are supposed to ensure that people are safe. And so IPID has to do its job. And this time, IPID has to make sure that they gather evidence in order to be able to prosecute. There's no point in saying we're investigating and then nothing happens, because that is not justice.
Shenilla, before I let you go, just remind us once again about the international guideline on the use of weapons when it comes to situations of protest, just related to what we saw today.
Well, the United Nations basic principles on the use of force and firearms by law enforcement officers, amongst other international standards, Devin, clearly provide that law enforcement officials may only use force if other means remain ineffective or have no promise of achieving the intended result. So, they should exercise restraint, and they should ensure that the force that they are using is in proportion to the seriousness of the offense and to the legitimate objective that's to be achieved. So in simple language, they should assess the situation and see whether or not whatever is happening warrants the type of force that they're using. And often what we're seeing is an indiscriminate use of force by police officials in South Africa. And we've seen this consistently over the years. Nothing is changing. And I think that is the biggest worry.
Yeah, we'll watch this one closely. Shenilla Mohamed from Amnesty International, in fact, the Executive Director. Thanks very much indeed.